So we're seeing that IT landscapes are becoming more complex. And one interesting question you can ask yourself is what does that mean in terms of operations, in terms of governing the things that you actually have and making sure that you operate them in the most effective way. And with us, we have Matthias Biel, API strategist at Software AG. Hey, Matthias, how are you doing?
Hi everyone. Hi Eric. Doing good.
Yeah, and thanks for joining again. So recently we talked about complexity in a video where we were, I would say, more talking about why it came along, and I think we ended at the conclusion it's unavoidable. and and I think today we can maybe look a little bit further and say, okay, if it's unavoidable, now how do you operate in such an environment? Because that, well, if it is unavoidable, then you better make sure that you actually deal with it in a responsible way. What do you see what organizations are trying to do or what they should be doing when it comes to managing that complexity in a way that they're safe and operating in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, so there's of course the big topic of governance that organizations more and more look into now that they feel this need, that there is this complexity, and they say, hey, what do we have to put in place as kind of guardrails to limit the complexity that can happen, but still allow kind of the necessary complexity that needs to happen. And we see this, for example, in the API space, where people now look more and more into API style guides, for example, in terms of governance. But we also see this governance, for example, in an iPaaS and low code environment, where they say business technologists are not allowed to create whatever, but there are still some security guidelines they have to adhere to. So it is necessary, and organizations more and more see some form of governance is really unavoidable, just as the complexity is unavoidable.
Because you mentioned that like API guidelines and these things, I think the other big trend that I've seen in the API space is the whole new space of federated API management, right? Which not too long ago didn't even exist. And now that seems to be a growing space where organizations are offering products or are looking for products. And that is that another indication maybe that shows that this idea of managing complexity in a good way is gaining traction?
Yes, I think so. So organizations, of course, now need to have this one pane of glass through which they are looking at their APIs wherever they are deployed, whether they are deployed in the cloud or they are deployed on premise. And that gives them this handle on their APIs.
And if you sometimes so if you now have these various places where you may run basically or provide your APIs, what are possible drivers that, apart from it just happened, but are there any other drivers that may say, okay, this is why we run this over here, this over here, this over there? What are possible drivers for that kind of setup?
Yeah, there's lots of drivers, and I think organizations are trying to optimize in that space right now, where they say, well, there's compliance reasons. There is some rules and regulations that tell us where we have to run certain things with certain security requirements, and we can only enforce those security requirements when we run it here and there. There's of course also cost considerations. Cloud is not for free. But of course, it has a lot it has a lot of advantages as well. So I think we see in general, of course, for several years the migration from on-prem to cloud, but for some of the most mature organizations that are already very mature in the cloud, they now strategically move a part of their service landscape back to on-prem. And I think this is a really interesting development, because from that we can learn it's not only everything going one dimensional into the cloud, but it says you need to be flexible, and you need to have the possibility to move things around in your system landscape so you can truly optimize. And this flexibility requires, of course, a new type of API management platform that allows you to do exactly that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting remark that you made there, that just moving stuff to the cloud is not doing that and then you're done. Like that's the only thing we will ever have to do again. Now it's in the cloud and it's all good. It's like, it's definitely more looking at trying to remain flexible and agile, whatever you would call that, so that if there are requirements that are changing, I can actually react to them without having to have these super heavy weight, which sometimes are amazingly complex, these cloud migration projects, right? When you look at sometimes how long that takes, if you start from a relatively old school environment, that's actually quite a thing. And I think that's sometimes also something where people are saying, or organizations are saying, okay, we don't want to go through that again. Or it should be easier. If we are going through this again, because we have to, it should be easier. I think that's probably the takeaway lesson there.
Yeah, absolutely. Flexibility is key here.
Yeah. And is there any fundamental difference? So I know that the last time we talked about complexity, I think we ended up with this takeaway of, okay, if complexity is what will happen unavoidably, then the job of IT management basically is to come up with a management model that supports that complexity. Is that for this operational part that we were discussing today? Is that the same? Any difference do you see, or is it basically just the same thing where you say, like, yeah, if you do manage complexity well, then the operational part kind of is part of the picture, I would say.
Yes, definitely, it's part of the picture. But on the operational side, it's just all these new dimensions that come on top of it. It's not just managing the complexity. Now it's also the governance, it's the regulation, it's the cost. And this requires really this flexibility in the end for your platform. So looking out for a flexible platform that allows you to kind of deal with whatever is thrown at you, that's really important going forward.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's a good summary of that, and I will make all the findings from the report that started like the last video and then also are relevant for this one. I will link those findings from the description so that you can find those. I think it's very interesting input to kind of inform yourself of how did we get here and where should we go. So thanks a lot, Matthias, for joining once again. And yeah, I guess going forward, right, we'll see that complexity will stay with us, but just the essential complexity.
Yeah, so that's right. We cannot avoid the essential complexity, but we definitely need to avoid any of this additional complexity that we introduce through the wrong type of management, so to say.
Okay, I think that's the right message, right? So handle essential complexity well, and you're good to go. So thanks everybody for watching. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And until next time, keep getting APIs to work. Bye, everybody.